Dear participants, esteemed panelists, colleagues, we are very pleased to welcome you to this event held on World Population Day 2025 in Asia and the Pacific, organized by ESCAP. This date gives us occasion to recognize, anticipate, and discuss shifting population structures in the region. As we know, Asia and the Pacific is at the forefront of the demographic transition, a process marked by lower fertility and mortality rates, resulting in rapid changes to population age structures. Never before in history have people of so many different age cohorts coexisted. Against this backdrop, it is important to explore intergenerational relations, which, as we will later learn, come alive across many different social and economic dimensions in our region. Today, on World Population Day, ESCAP will launch the latest issue of the Asia-Pacific Sustainable Development Journal, which focuses on demographic trends and intergenerational relations in our region. This online event will feature opening remarks by the Undersecretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of ESCAP, plus special remarks from the Managing Editor of the APSD Journal. These will be followed by an overview presentation on demographic trends and a moderated panel discussion. We hope this event will deepen the knowledge of demographic change and its implications for intergenerational relations while broadening the conversation surrounding these themes. Please allow me to remind you of some housekeeping rules. In the opening of the meeting and during the panel, may I kindly request that speakers do not turn on their cameras. I will ask you to turn on your video and audio when I introduce you and invite you to speak. We will now hear a pre-recorded welcome message from Ms. Armida Salcia Alice Jabana, Undersecretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of ESCAP. Please allow just a few moments for the video to load. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the commemoration of World Population Day 2025 in Asia and the Pacific. Today, we focus on demographic trends and their implications for intergenerational relations, an issue that is very timely and relevant for our region. Asia and the Pacific is experiencing a rapid demographic transition with significant changes in population age structure. In many countries, the number of working age people is stagnating, already declining, or projected to decline soon, while the number of older persons continues to rise. At the same time, the number of children and youth remains high in several countries. Never before in the region's history have so many people of so many age cohorts lived together. These demographic shifts are affecting economic and social development. In countries where working age populations are stagnating or declining, economic growth can be negatively affected. Countries with growing youth population are facing youth unemployment. The growing number of older persons, many of them women, lack social protection and are at risk of falling into poverty. Rapid digitalization has created age and gender digital divides in access to services and social interaction. While more people of different generations are coexisting, older persons are often left behind in rural areas. Where they exist, the success of intergenerational living arrangements depends on cultural norms, economic condition, and the availability of age-appropriate infrastructure and supportive communities. Often, intergenerational living arises from socioeconomic pressures of cultural expectation, which can result in adverse outcomes such as gender inequality and poverty among female caregivers. In addressing these challenges, it is important to invest in reskilling and upskilling over the life course, including with regard to digital skills. This way, youth and older persons can continue to work and accumulate assets. Flexible work, later retirement, and investment in care can pave the way for increased workforce participation of women and older persons. Long-term holistic support through neighborhoods can strengthen community bonds and create inclusive, resilient, age-friendly, and cross-generational living arrangement. These issues are presented in the special issue of the Asia Pacific Sustainable Development Journal, which we are also launching today. I'm very pleased to see that demographic trends and their implications for intergenerational relations are recognized as a megatrend. I'm also hopeful that the special issue of the journal and this event itself will contribute to a better understanding of the issue and the formulation of recommendation for solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will now hear special remarks from Mr. Anis Chaudhry, Emeritus Professor at Western Sydney University and Managing Editor of the APSD Journal. Mr. Chaudhry, please turn on your camera and audio. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for inviting me today in this special event where we are launching the Asia Pacific Sustainable Development Journal's first issue of the year, which has included articles on the mega trend in the region on the demographic changes. While the panelists will speak on the articles themselves, let me briefly speak about the journal itself. The Asia Pacific Sustainable Development Journal is actually, in this title, is being published from 2018, but it is an old journal of the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, ESCAP. It began in the late 40s with different names, and the previous name was Asia Pacific Development Journal. Now, with the focus shifting from development to sustainable development, we thought it was proper to reflect that global change in the development thought and retitled it as Asia Pacific Sustainable Development Journal. Some of the key features of this journal is it has got a very experienced editorial and advisory boards with considerable international reputations. It has a very rigorous anonymous review process. It is classified as a B category journal by the Australian Business Deans Council, ABDC. It is indexed with research papers in economics and as well as with economic literature, Journal of Economic Literature. The other feature is that its aims and objectives that we have, it stimulates and enrich research on policy changes in achieving sustainable development goals, i.e. SDGs. It provides a platform for policymakers to share their experiences. It provides a bridge between academic research and policymakers. It also offers capacity development opportunities to early career researchers. It encourages publications by researchers, academics, practitioners, countries in special situations. It doesn't mean that it does not encourage articles from other parts, but it provides a platform, especially for countries in special situations, i.e. least developed countries, landlocked countries, small island developing states and economics in transition. There's some key statistics of the journal, like impact factors. As of 30th of June 2025, REPAC impact factor is 1.535. Previously, when the journal was titled as Asia Pacific Development Journal, the impact factor reached 2.98, nearly 3. So as all of you know, when you change the title of the journal, everything starts from new. So it is climbing back the impact factor it had with the previous title. So, and this is comparable with similar journals in the region. For example, Asia Pacific Economic Literature, which impact factor is 1.617, and Asian Development Review, which comes out from the Asian Development Bank, the impact factor is 2.0. So it is not far off from the impact factor achieved by similar journals. So the idea is this journal provides a bridge between policymakers and the researchers, and the fact that the kind of articles we have included here, although the articles are mostly written by academics, but with policy implications, and we expect that the policymakers will benefit from these research findings. So I'll stop here in the interest of time, and I'll be happy to answer any queries. And I urge all of you to consider publishing your research paper in this journal, and also encourage your colleagues to publish in this journal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chaudhry, for these remarks. And colleagues, I have to apologize. I understood my audio wasn't very clear. I hope it's better now. We will now hear from Ms. Sabina Henning, Chief of the Sustainable Demographic Transition Section of the Social Development Division of UN ESCAP. Ms. Henning will provide an overview presentation on demographic changes and intergenerational relations in Asia and the Pacific. Ms. Henning, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning. This presentation will provide a very brief overview of demographic trends in Asia and the Pacific, and the way how they're shaping intergenerational relations in the region. Next slide, please. Our world today is shaped by 5 megatrends. These trends do not affect people, planet, and prosperity in isolation. Their effects often overlap. They refer to climate change and nature degradation, inequalities, urbanization, technology, and demographic trends, in particular population aging. Next slide, please. The topic of intergenerational relations has been at the core of the work of the United Nations, going back to the Charter of the United Nations in 1946. The Charter states that we are all tasked to save succeeding generations from war, and then it continues. Thus, a view towards the future, towards future generations, was embedded in the Charter and has guided our work ever since. In the area of social development, other global and regional guiding documents have been adopted, and some of them are listed here. It is the ICPD Program of Action, the Copenhagen Declaration, the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, the 2030 Agenda, or the Pact for the Future. Next slide, please. Looking at these documents and the agreed language more closely, we are reminded of our responsibility for present and future generations, which include young and old people today and tomorrow. Moreover, our responsibility is to foster and strengthen solidarity among generations and intergenerational partnerships with the goal of building societies for all. There's also a strong call for fostering intergenerational dialogues and for protecting the integrity and sustainable use of our environment for current and future generations. I will not go into more detail. The PowerPoint will be posted on the websites, and we invite you to reflect on these documents and their mentioning of intergenerational relations. Next slide, please. Looking at the latest demographic trends in Asia Pacific, we see that the region has changed in fundamental ways. The population is standing now at 4.8 billion and is projected to increase to 5.1 billion by 2050. As you can see in the slide, population growth, however, is already declining. Next slide, please. By 2050, we therefore project that Asia Pacific's population will peak. And as you can also see in the slide, in many countries of the region, the peak has already been reached. So there's a trend of population stagnation and decline already going on in several countries of Asia and the Pacific. Now, these are regional trends, and of course, they mask a lot of variation at the national and subnational levels, but the story is clear. Population, demographic trends are changing societies in fundamental ways. Next slide, please. Underlying the overall population growth or decline, of course, is a change in fertility and mortality. Total fertility rates have declined for about 6 children per woman in the 1960s to 1.8 live births today. And life expectancy, as you can see, has increased significantly. More people are surviving to old age, and those who do are living longer. This is particularly true for women whose life expectancy is still higher than for men. And given the experiences over the life course, this, of course, will then also affect the situation they are faced in old age if they're living longer. So the gender perspective is always very important when discussing population aging and the implications of population aging on society. Next slide, please. Regarding total fertility in 1990, we count about 8 countries that had fertility levels below replacement levels. And today we're counting 30 countries. And you can see there is more change projected in the near future. So countries are experiencing decline in fertility and very low levels in several countries already observed. Next slide, please. Of course, this has effects on the population age structure, with a number of children and youth already peaking, and with the working age population projected to peak very soon. At the same time, the number and share of older persons is projected to continue to grow. In fact, by 2050, we expect about 1 billion older persons, 65 years and older, to be living in Asia Pacific. And since Asia Pacific is so important in terms of population size compared to other regions, 63% of all older persons in the world will be living in Asia and the Pacific. Next slide, please. And of course, this then affects also the counting of countries that are already aging or aged or super aged. And as you can see, there is a clear transition from aging to aged and super aged already going on in several countries, with more now falling into the aged and super aged category today, but also in the near future. Next slide, please. Looking at this from a slightly different perspective, more people of different age groups are also now coexisting. Coexisting meaning living together. And this is very different from the past because older persons are living longer and they're still younger people, of course, in the working age population. So more people of different age cohorts are living together, which has significant implication on intergenerational relations. Next slide, please. I would like to focus on 2 aspects of the intergenerational relations coming out of these demographic trends. Number 1 is living arrangements. And since people are living longer, but there are fewer children, for example, it will affect how people reside together. Interestingly, for Asia and Pacific, as you can see in this slide, compared to other regions in the world, older persons continue to live in families or bigger households. And this is quite significant if you look at the numbers, and it applies to both men and women. So older persons in Asia Pacific, if they can, continue to live with family members. Now, of course, as I said, these are regional trends. At the national level, there is more variation, but there is this clear tendency and preference to co-residing with family members and in bigger households. Next slide, please. We will hear a little bit about national transfer accounts. We'll talk about the economic flows between generations. This chart is looking at the relationship between the generations over the life course in terms of time spent at work and at home. And what you can see here is that older persons are net producers of care over the life course. And they're also often the women that are providing this care. So this is another aspect of intergenerational relations, because care is directed towards children and grandchildren, but also older persons, and often older persons, often older women, providing the care for the children, for the grandchildren, but also for other older family members. Next slide, please. So there are many more examples of how intergenerational relations can be expressed, and we will talk about this. I will just hint at some of these. The rights aspect will be discussed, social protection, digital divide. In all of this, we find young and old interacting more closely together, and we are exploring how we can strengthen these relationships today and in the future. Next slide, please. So in summary, what we can see is that Asia Pacific has undergone significant demographic change. Now, the timing, duration, and speed of this change might vary by country, but the trend is very clear. People are surviving to older ages, and people are having fewer children, and the share of older persons and the total number is increasing at the same time. Thus, for the first time in history, people of more different age cohorts will be coexisting. And this will have different implications on intergenerational relations with its many dimensions in terms of care, learning, digital technology, or working relationships. Given this overall demographic context, or behind this overall demographic background, the topic of intergenerational relations and demographic trends is very timely and highly relevant for our region. Thank you very much, and we look forward to the panel discussion.
Colleagues, we will now move on to our panel discussion. Will the moderator and panelists please kindly turn on your cameras? Thank you. Our moderator for this panel is Mr. Srinivas Tata, Director of the Social Development Division at ESCAP. We are joined today by panelists representing academia, the public sector, and civil society. We will first hear from Mr. Ronald Lee, Professor Emeritus of Economics and Demography at the University of California at Berkeley. Mr. Lee has recorded a video statement for us. Next, allow me to introduce Mr. Andrew Burns, Emeritus Professor of International Law and Human Rights at the University of New South Wales. Next, we are pleased to have with us Ms. Riju Dapal, Program Officer at ARROW, here representing Youth Voices. Our next panelist is Ms. Lisa Rosales, Undersecretary for Population and Development and Executive Director of the Commission on Population and Development of the Philippines. And finally, we are joined by Ms. Emmy Kyoka, Associate Professor of the Department of Architecture and Director of the Center for Environment and Aging Well at the National University of Singapore. I now turn over the floor to Mr. Tata to begin our discussion.
Thank you very much, Elena, and thank you for making my job slightly easier. Thank you for introducing the panel, and also I'm very grateful for the very substantive opening remarks of the Executive Secretary and the wonderful scene-setting presentation by my colleague Sabine. And in addition, the remarks of Mr. Professor Chaudhary, Anish Chaudhary, who really explained the role of the journal in conveying the research to policymakers and providing this wonderful link between research and policy, and providing a forum for research from our region to really be demonstrated to the rest of the world. So thank you, Mr. Chaudhary, also for your presentation. But I really think that we have had a wonderful scene setting already from Sabine. So I think we have this very strong panel from very different background, with panelists coming from very different backgrounds, all contributing to the same topic of intergenerational relations and demographic change, which really will, I hope, will give us a real multidimensional perspective on this issue. The first panelist, who was already introduced by Lena, is Mr. Ronald Lee, who had recorded a statement. It's a very difficult, it's a very odd time for him, and also his location is a bit difficult. So we had posed a couple of questions to him. As you know, Mr. Lee is an economist and a demographer who has been working in the area, especially of demographic change, and really been championing the use of national transfer accounts, national time transfer accounts, as well as national inclusion accounts. Based on that, we asked Mr. Ronald Lee a couple of questions. We had asked him to address in his remarks how countries and people of Asia Pacific had been impacted by the demographic transition, in particular the economic consequences. Secondly, we asked him about his advice, especially as many countries are entering uncharted waters with this demographic transition taking place so fast, as to how strategic foresight could guide our actions today and how we could be more forward-looking and adaptable in our decision making. So Mr. Lee's statement now will actually address both questions, and then we will take up a panel discussion with the rest of the panelists, the rest of the 4 panelists here. So I will ask my colleagues in the Secretariat to play the video.
I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to discuss my journal article at this launch. As you know, population aging is coming to all countries in the Asia-Pacific region, even though these countries are all at different stages of the demographic transition. In some countries, the share of the labor force in the population is still growing. They're experiencing a positive demographic dividend, while other countries are much farther along in the transition, and they're experiencing population aging now, which will be greater in future years. Now, population aging has important economic impacts, which is what I want to discuss now. There are 2 kinds of impacts. Defining population growth rates are an important central aspect of population aging, and slower or declining population and labor force growth translates roughly 1-for-1 into slowing or declining GDP growth rates. Not any absolute decline in GDP growth, but rather relative to its underlying trend. So if GDP would otherwise have been growing at 4% per year with population aging, perhaps it will only be growing at 2 or 3% per year, for example. Slower GDP growth does not necessarily mean slower growth of per capita income, however, because the population is also growing more slowly, and so the ratio of the 2 may be rising or falling, and both are experienced in the high-income countries of Europe and OECD. Which one happens will depend on the kinds of support systems for the elderly that each country has and on their projected demographic experience. The second kind of impact is on these very support systems that I just mentioned. Some countries rely heavily on transfers, either from the family or from the public sector, to provide for the consumption of elderly people. In upper middle income, there's a sort of transitional stage in which the public sector is coming to replace familial transfers, and in higher income countries, there's a fairly heavy reliance on public transfers to provide for the elderly. In countries that are fairly far along in this population aging process and with strong public sector programs, like move towards the middle of the century and these populations age more deeply, it appears it will be necessary to reduce the benefits per elderly person by about 30% relative to the underlying economic trends, or alternatively, to increase the taxes paid by each worker by 40% or more again, relative to the increasing trend. And most likely there will be some combination of these responses. That's the fairly important impact when countries rely heavily on public sector transfers for the elderly. Now, what can they do to reduce these impacts? There are a number of things. First, of course, many countries are trying to increase the fertility of their populations, and to the extent that this involves helping the families manage the costs of child rearing and so on, I think it's a great idea. But the experience of countries around the world is that these programs have little effect on fertility levels. It's a very difficult matter for government policy to raise fertility. I suggest is considering structures for pensions and health care that, first of all, share the costs of population aging more equally across the generations of young and old. Also, I suggest structures of policies that have some automatically stabilizing elements built in. Examples are the pension programs in Sweden and in Germany today. I suggest countries look at those because one of their features, aside from sharing the costs more equally, is that they adjust automatically to population aging, to rising or declining productivity growth rates, and so on, so that politicians don't need to try to change retirement age and such things, reduce benefits in the face of strong public opposition, as we see in Europe today. Third, it's very important to raise the primary income of older workers by encouraging and incentivizing them to stay in the labor market and work longer so that they're generating more income to pay for themselves, and in addition to incentivize working age people through saving programs and so on to accumulate assets so that when they become old, they will have more asset income and also work longer, and there will be less need for transfers from the working age population. Fourth, I think it's important that governments institute non-political agencies to do long-term projections of government finances that reflect whatever public programs are being proposed or implemented for transfers to the elderly, so that they can see what the costs will be. And finally, I think the traditional historical family support systems in Asia and the Pacific are a real source of strength, and governments should nurture and encourage these continue. The financial aspect of that support should be less because of public transfer systems, but many other aspects of support are needed and desirable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee, for recording this video for us and responding to both those questions that were put to you. And really, that was very, very helpful. We wish he could have been here live online, but it's late, pretty late, right across the world where he is. So now it allows me to move on to so with the four remaining panelists who have already been introduced and who I'll introduce again when I pose my question to them, we'll have 2 rounds of questions. And each round, we expect the panelists to take about 3 minutes to provide a response. And after we finish with the 2 rounds, we will open up the floor for discussion in as much as we will be looking at your questions in the chat and then be reaching out to the panelists to respond to them after collecting a few and then asking the questions. And we hope that this will stimulate a good discussion amongst the panelists. So My next question, therefore, of the first round is now addressed to Professor Andrew Burns, who is the Emeritus Professor of International Law and Human Rights at the University of New South Wales in Australia, who's done work extensively, of course, throughout the world, but particularly in Australia and the Pacific. And my question to you, Andrew, is as an expert on human rights, how would you describe the human rights implications of what we have been told we have learned over the previous part of this discussion about the current and future demographic trends in the Asia Pacific? Over to you, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Srinivasan. It's a great pleasure to take part in this panel. Many of the challenges which are discussed in the special issue of the Asia Pacific Sustainable Development Journal launched today are human rights issues, not just economic and social development issues. Accordingly, I'm going to be arguing today that we need to do much more in our social development work to incorporate a substantive human rights framework, in particular relating to aging, but more broadly, and to do so systematically and holistically. This will, among other things, also contribute to building a solid human rights consistent concept of intergenerational solidarity. This concept is both a descriptive and a normative concept, and in some respects it's not under problematic in terms of some of its manifestations or examples which seem to meet with general approval. The example of filial piety laws in a number of countries in Asia Pacific is, I think, a case which presents itself for discussion. When I talk about human rights, of course, I mean the extensive body of binding international law obligations contained in the core UN human rights treaties and other instruments, ranging from the non-binding Universal Declaration of Human Rights through the International Covenants on Human Rights and treaties on racial discrimination, discrimination against women, Convention on the Rights of the Child, itself a intergenerational treaty, Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and on migrant workers. These human rights frameworks are distinct from the broader policy frameworks discussed or applied in the journal in that they do three things. They set normative standards bolstered by explicit legal obligations borne by governments. They confer rights on individuals and groups as holders of entitlements, not merely as the recipients of discretionary benefits following policy decisions. And finally, they establish monitoring and accountability processes internationally and nationally. These are three essential elements of a human rights approach that differentiates in important respects from some of the other approaches adopted. Many of the major issues discussed in the journal issue are already the subject of state obligations under human rights law. These include the abolition of ageism, age discrimination, and their adverse impacts, need for access to adequate housing and a home for older people, need to ensure economic security, access to physical and mental health services, and need to access government and other information, the digital divide issue. So the policy goals identified in the various journal articles to address these concerns align closely with human rights goals. In some cases, human rights goals can provide guidance about which of the available policy responses is more appropriate or about the most inclusive and participatory ways of responding to challenges. Social development-oriented discussions of aging and older persons do make reference to human rights, rights-based approaches, or specific rights such as health and social security. But these are rarely developed in detail and rarely any discussion of effective accountability messages. So we need to do more. A full-blooded human rights approach would reinforce and supplement existing diagnoses of aging issues and inform policy responses, could provide greater impetus to states by emphasising the obligations binding on them, would empower individuals and communities to participate as rights holders, and would provide procedures for holding governments accountable to their communities, perhaps the element in the room. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for setting the stage, even uncovering some of the issues that I'm going to ask in the second round. So thank you very much, including referring to, illustrating the fact that a lot of the issues that we reflect in the journal actually merit a rights-based approach within countries, and you already explained how this could be done. But we'll expand a bit on it in the second round. I'd like to now move to Ms. Riju Dhakal, who's the program officer at Arrow, who will not only be representing the youth voice, but as she has so ably in the past also brought in the issue of gender very, very, very strongly. So thank you so much. So Riju, my question to you is, how will future demographic trends affect young people in Asia and the Pacific? And with the number and share of older persons growing rapidly in many countries, the number of youth also remains high. So the question is, what are the chances and what are the opportunities for young and old to work together to co-create societies for all generations? Over to you, Riju.
Thanks so much, Srinivas, for that question. And it's an honor to be in this panel along with the experts here. So I want to begin with a story from my personal experience. So it's been 3 years since I've graduated my undergraduate degree in public health. And I am the single in a batch of 39 people who are now currently left in Nepal. So where are my friends? All in search of better opportunities. This isn't just my story. It reflects a national trend for us. So youth migration is reshaping Nepal's economy and society and creating an uneven population shrinkages and expansions across rural and urban areas. And it speaks to a broader regional shift. So across Asia and the Pacific, the demographic trends are diverging. Countries like Japan, China are aging rapidly, while others like Philippines still have a youth bulge. This brings both risks and opportunities of intergenerational coexistence and collaboration. Let's start with care. Women in the region do nearly 3 times more unpaid care work than men. The labor is vital yet invisible. Recognizing, reducing, and supporting care responsibilities, especially unpaid, is essential because this increases the expectation and burden of care responsibilities among young and older women significantly. With increased life expectancy, the care responsibilities have only expanded, both paid and unpaid. But care could be a potential bridge between generations, causing a disproportionate burden of cost of demographic trends among women and young people. If we invest in systems that support both young and older caregivers, we create shared solutions that benefit for all. And if we as young people look for a future for tomorrow, we imagine gender equality and reproductive justice. Because fertility crisis is real. But the solution is not to pressure women into childbirth. It is to support a system that supports their autonomy and choices. The answer lies in reproductive autonomy, informed choices, and access to comprehensive sexual and reproductive health and rights. Young people are definitely looking for opportunities of growth, learning and shaping their lives in systems that protect and promote their capacities. Lifelong learning is one such bridge of opportunity that we see today and across different generations. It keeps older people engaged and also allows young people like us to grow with perspective, innovation, and future forward strategies. We've seen digital innovation harness healthcare, education, work, and different career opportunities as well. But the benefits have not been equally shared. Digitalization has too often advanced in unaccountable and extractive ways, enriching big tech more than just communities. Who designs, who profits, and who is excluded? Women, especially older and rural women, gender diverse people, face deep digital exclusion. We need digital systems built around care, equity, and public good. While we expect Asia Pacific's population to peak in 2050 with a growing aging population right now, urbanization, climate crisis, and migration are real and they're disrupting traditional family structures as well. The traditional support system that earlier Andrew was also talking about are weakening. So can young people and older people co-create inclusive societies? Absolutely. But it cannot happen on its own. Young people and older persons are not in competition. We are interdependent. Investing in care systems, social protection, and learning opportunities benefits all of us because we are all at different stages and we must invest in inclusive policies, gender equality, and trust in youth leadership and intergenerational learning. Only then can. Yes, over to you, Srinivas.
No, go on. Only please finish.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we can only turn the demographic trends into a shared opportunity as we start seeing intergenerational cooperation as our asset. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have been so eloquent. You have done a lot of things. You've related the whole issue of demographic change with the other mega trends. You've highlighted the importance of the care economy. You've so beautifully blended in also the gender aspect of the aging population. So I think you've done us a lot of you've kind of highlighted a lot of important areas, which I hope will be picked up later in the discussions. So I will now move on to our next panelist. Thank you, Riju. And I'd like to move to Ms. Lisa Basales, who is the Undersecretary for Population and Development and the Executive Director of the Commission on Population and Development of the Philippines. She's someone who's really been working at the regional level, steering a lot of regional consensus on population matters, and we're very happy to have us with us on this panel. Ms. Basales, as an expert on data statistics and SDG monitoring, what kind of data are required to inform policy making at regional, national, and local levels in order to respond to the demographic trends and the implications? Where do you see, as a policymakers, are the data gaps, and what are the emerging issues that we need to look at? Over to you, Madam Basales.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tata. It's a pleasure and an honor to be part of this panel. Now, at the regional and national level, we actually have the traditional data sources that are being produced by our statistics offices, and they have already established standards. And so quality of these data are assured. I speak of the censuses, and specifically the census of population and housing. These are very important for us to really look at population pyramids. So these censuses are the source of why we say that we are headed towards population aging. And these are also the sources for us to say, like what we just said, that some of the countries of Asia Pacific still have the youth bulge. For some more developed countries, instead of censuses, they already collect population registers, which are more updated than censuses, which are done every 10 years. Surveys are very important, and I single out two important social surveys. We have the demographic and health surveys, and the mixed multi-indicator survey developed by UNICEF. And you know, we really have to work together in Asia Pacific to deal with the fact that USAID has closed. USAID was the one that helped many countries in Asia Pacific and even other countries in the world, the developing countries, to do their demographic and health surveys. We also have sectoral surveys, and in many countries, statistics offices do the censuses and multi-purpose surveys, but sectoral agencies do specific surveys. Like in the Philippines, we have the digital surveys that is promoted by our Department of ICT. We also have the survey on energy consumption, and we also have the survey on education, but this is in collaboration with our statistics office. Other data are administrative data, and this is really a rich source of information. But now, because at the local level, we also need information, and they are more granular. We now see local level information systems being promoted and done. And example are community-based monitoring systems, which are at the municipal level. I would also like to single out civil registration systems, which are sources of very important information on registration of marriages and births and death. So what are still the data gaps? We have many sources of information that I mentioned already. The data gaps are really on very special groups like migrants, migration and climate change information, data for indigenous peoples, data for the persons with disability. So we still have to work on providing for them.
Thank you so much. And coming from someone who's a very senior practitioner at the country level, what to say is really important, and highlighting the traditional sources supplemented by surveys, and also the difficulties by some surveys which may be difficult to continue because the sponsor of these surveys has changed, and so we have to find a way of maybe using the mix more widely across to replace wherever the DHS was. And thank you for highlighting the importance of the civil registration and vital statistics. And above all, I think in the end, when you said the key issue of addressing the data gap is for the left behind group. So here too, the LNOB, leaving no one behind, is critical. If we don't do it, then obviously we're going to leave very significant proportion of the population behind. Thank you so much, ma'am. We'll come back to you on the second round on how some of these things, how steps are being taken and what steps can be taken to plug these gaps. I have the honor now to move on to Ms. Emmy Kyoto. And we know that Ms. Emmy Kyoto is the Associate Professor of the Department of Architecture, and she's the Director of the Center for Environment and Aging Well at the National University of Singapore. And my question to Ms. Kyoto is, as an environmental gerontologist and an organizational culture change specialist who works closely with communities, how do you describe the challenges and opportunities of the demographic trends discussed earlier, particularly with regard to creating enabling and supportive environments? So over to you, Emmy.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Tata. And it's really my honor to be included in this panel. As a person who is working at the intersection of environmental gerontology and community engagement initiative, I see the current demographic shift not as a challenge or crisis, to be honest, but as an opportunity to reimagine how we live our life, looking across the life course actually approach. And I would like to share my 3 key points for this matter. And the very first one is that we should reframe what it means to age. Longer life expectancy, changing lifestyles and family structure and the gender roles means that aging is it's no longer a predictable or uniform experience as we used to experience. The challenge is that many of our systems currently still treat older people as a dependent or vulnerable. But in reality, older people are actually more educated and healthier in many areas. And they can actually be an asset and resources. They carry knowledge, network, contribution that are essential to the community well-being as a whole. And the opportunity is to shift our mindset from caring for older person to co-create environment where everyone can live with meaning and purpose at any ages. The second point is enable environment go beyond physical design. Too often we equate age-friendliness or age-friendly environment with ramps and handrails. But really, enabling environment should address social and emotional dimensions of perspective. Places that foster relationship, participation, reciprocity. When working with older person, I often guided by this phrase: the time to be happy is now, the place to be happy is here, and the way to be happy is to make other people happy. It reminds me that well-being is not about individual achievement. It is built in the community. We need to redesign places where people are not only live safely, but also feel that they matters. The third one is disability is not in the older persons themselves. It is about the environment. As we age, we start to face challenges due to physical and cognitive challenges. If someone cannot participate like us, it's not just about their abilities. It's about the mismatch between their needs and the environment around them. This means that inclusion is not about fixing people, but changing system. If we want to meet the changing needs of our aging society, we must invest upstream, designing home, neighborhood, and policies that are adaptable, equitable, and inclusive from the very beginning. I do believe that aging is not a problem to solve, but a powerful opportunity to build more just, joyful, and resilient community for people of all ages. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmy. I think you've stressed the point that many of us about looking at this whole demographic transition as something that we is a result of positive changes, including drops in fertility, giving more choice to women, increasing longevity, and the whole trend sometimes of describing it as a disaster, but rather we should look upon it as a natural progression that we need to adapt to better. And the point that you make about changing the mindset from all older persons being dependent to a positive viewpoint of really what they do in terms of the many contributions that they make, often unrecognized. And above all, I think the point that you make about an enabling environment, not just about being the physical environment, but also the social and emotional dimensions. And the fact that people are disabled because the environment makes them disabled. So the question is, if they're an enabling environment, that disability would often be reduced or disappear. They would be able to contribute far better. It's a wonderful point that we'll get to reflect on as we move into our second round. Thank you very much, Emmy. We'll change the order a little bit in our second round. And I'd like to start with Madame Bersalis this time, with the first question being asked to you. And I'd request our panelists to perhaps keep their responses a bit more succinct at about 3 minutes, so that we can have enough discussions later on. And I'll have ample opportunity to come back to you repeatedly to answer any questions that may arise. So, Ms. Basalis, the second question to you is, you've already covered the importance of timely, relevant, and disaggregated data, and also what are the traditional sources. So tell me, are there any good practices in holding data to hold decision makers accountable? And are there any new and noteworthy trends in data collection, which unusual sources that we can tap into? So I'd be very grateful if you could answer these two questions in your second response, Madam Basalis. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tata. I'll start with your second question. The new data sources now are exciting because they actually provide more timely information. Big data is really a rich source now. You know, the use of social media capturing sentiments from there are being used just to know the pulse of the people. Mobile data and satellite imagery are among the most used big data sources. But I would like to say that longitudinal studies have existed for quite some time. And these longitudinal studies have been done by academics and research institutions, not really by official statistics offices, because they require looking at cohort through time. And so the looking at intergenerational relationships are very important, and longitudinal studies are the ones that we go to. And may I share in the Philippines that we have this longitudinal study on aging and health in the Philippines. And the report, it has 2 waves already. It started in 2018, and it highlights the differences in the challenges of older women and older men. Another one that we'll follow closely now is the longitudinal study of the Filipino child. Its data collection started in 2016, and it is ongoing. And what is exciting is that one very important result, which for me is an example of intergenerational relationship, is some of our young are not dreaming anymore. They don't dream anymore to be a teacher or to be a lawyer. And the reason is that their mothers are not dreaming for them anymore. And so this is a very important result of that study. Now, how do we use data to make government accountable? Let me just share one in the interest of time. The Philippines now has this second Congressional Education Commission, which is doing a comprehensive study of our educational system. And a number of results from various data in the Philippines have been used. Example is data from our labor force survey, which indicate some issues on informality. And a study that I did showed that college students who do not earn a degree, they become informal sector workers. And that has a consequence on their not having social protection. And when they become older, if they don't prepare well, they don't have a pension. Thank you very much. Mr. Tata, I cannot hear you. Sorry.
Please
Sorry,
unmute.
this is part of the unmuting and muting that, yes, I have to keep that in mind. Thank you very much for answering both components of my question very comprehensively, highlighting the opportunity that big data provides and the sourcing from mobile and satellite data, and also something like longitudinal studies which have been around for some time, but perhaps could be used more more and perhaps linked to policy making in the way that you explained. And thank you very much also for, from your personal experience, also highlighting how data can be used to hold policymakers accountable, but also perhaps inform them better when they frame the next policies or when they review policies. Thank you very much, Ms. Basales. I will now move to Professor Andrew Burns. Andrew, in the light and based on the first question, your response to the first question, do we have the tools needed for a people-centered, human rights-based approach to building a society for all ages in the future? And in this context, maybe what's happening at the international level is something that you have been involved in. And so perhaps you could also refer to that and tell us your thoughts on this. Over to you, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Srinivas. Yes, we have some of the tools, but we certainly need to use those better. But we also need new tools which are specifically designed to address the sorts of issues we've been talking about. And we're now, as you've intimated, at a critical juncture as a result of recent UN General Assembly and Human Rights Council decisions to embark on a new stage of normative development, that is, to develop a new treaty on the human rights of older persons. So let me touch on each of those, making better use of the human rights frameworks we already have. How can we do it? Well, the first thing to say, I guess, is that all the treaties that we have are relevant, particularly when we adopt a life course approach. The Convention on the Rights of the Child is an older person's human rights instrument because it's going to affect how the children who benefit from that experience older age. So that, CEDAW and the others are all there. The mainstream bodies, human rights bodies in the system need to do better, as do governments. But social development bodies also need to adopt a more substantive and integrated approach to human rights in the context of aging. For example, discussions of the digital divide and the barriers older people face in accessing information and services could draw more extensively on human rights in the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and also in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And the discussion we've just heard from Ms. Basales about statistics, we could also refer to Article 31 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which has a specific provision on that. Similarly with ageism, where we could draw on some, but we do need some supplements. Equally, in relation to intergenerational equality in the context of climate, the recent decision, advisory opinion of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights shows very clearly how human rights can contribute to intergenerational solidarity in the area of climate change. But we need new developments. The last 15 years have seen us look at the existing system, and we've found fundamental flaws. And they're conceptual flaws because they don't take into account increased longevity, demographic aging, widespread ageism, and age discrimination. So we need a major refresh of the system. And the Human Rights Council, following the General Assembly's recommendations, has embarked on this process, setting up a new intergovernmental working group to start work next year to elaborate a convention. That's going to provide us with new tools in the form of explicit and detailed adaptations of existing norms, or even some innovative formulations to address the human rights violations faced by older persons. There are many areas, some of them will be relatively new, explicitly addressing ageism, digital divide, IT, AI, and older persons. But importantly also, intersectionality will be front and center, and a life course approach will be front and center. So the drafting process will give us all of those of us who are interested in bettering the lives of older people and future older persons the opportunity to influence our governments and to address these issues in a focused way. And we need to ensure that the voices of the Asia-Pacific region are heard and heeded in this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andrew. You've been comprehensive, kind of indicating where existing instruments could be used better, but also kind of updating us very, very, in a detailed manner about the value that a global instrument on older, to protect the rights of older persons could make towards the lives of older persons. And this is clearly a very big opportunity, and I'm sure a lot of different stakeholders want to contribute to this process. And we hope that this will culminate in the adoption of an instrument in the near future that will really impact the lives of older persons in a positive manner. So thank you, Andrew, for that. I'm sure there'll be a few questions pertaining to that coming back. So we'll be looking to you to answer those questions. I'd like to move to Emmy Kyoto now. Emmy, you have worked on co-creating socially integrated, sustainable communities in our region, in Asia Pacific, that value and welcome both young and old. What have you learned about people of different generations living and working together? How does it work? What roles can civil society representatives and policymakers play in creating these communities?
Yeah,
So over to
thank
you.
you so much. Yes. Through my work in co-creating Ibasho project, which is just try to create socially integrated, sustainable community that value the older person. What I've learned is very simple but profound. Maybe I'm a little bit biased being studying architecture, but place really doesn't matter. Actually, also address ageism even, not just as a physical location, but as a social container. Actually, to think about it, and it's a setting where relationship can naturally form and grow. You know, when we talk about intergenerational living and collaborations, we often imagine structured program to connect, but meaningful relationships don't really usually form on that schedule. They emerge unstructured, everyday moments in a place where people naturally gather, spend time, and just enjoy being. That's why we must create open, inclusive spaces where people of all ages want to come, actually, on their own term. They can be space to, they can come to the space to garden and have tea or read newspaper or do nothing in particular really, but sit and spend time with their neighbors. It's those casual, low pressure setting that incidental encounter happens. People become familiar, they chat, and trust starts to build. That's the true foundation of meaningful intergenerational connections. I actually asked for 2 slides to share so that I can show how it looks like. Yes. So I have 2 slides. The first, this is the same place. What I mean by inclusive and open space, I just wanted to share with you. This is a place, it's a Kasuga Dai Center in Kanagawa, Japan. It used to be a supermarket here, but they made it into community function, community hub that has 5 different functions. That daycare center for children, older person, and group home for older person, for dementia, and study space for children in the neighborhood, and work opportunity space for people with disabilities. This is categorized as an institution because it's run by the social organization. But one good example to make space more open so that we are able to get rid of a sense of stigma by the design. The first one is normally people do come for food. So children will come all the time because they have a food. Can you go to the next slide? Yes. So this is how it look like. And they're not really doing a program together. They just be themselves. And when I ask children why they come, they said because this is a nice place to play, which to me it is a a big mindset change because we normally program things and for children and older people to interact. But also I've learned that context matters deeply. Actually, this is a Japanese example. The desire to belong and contribute, connect with others, generation is a universal concept. But, what it works in the rural part of Nepal is different from what we experience in Japan or urban setting in Singapore. So, while the values can be shared, we also have to be very careful about how to approach so that flexible, rooted local culture and norms are reflected into placing it. And of course, to do this work, what we've learned is that we need a whole of society approach. Civil society, local community, government working together. But doing so, we must be careful not to lose the spirit of community-based action by civil society. It's about supporting, not replacing. It should be a local ownership that can be celebrated. And finally, we need to rethink about how we measure success. Working on the ground, what we've learned is that traditional research output often don't feed back into the community themselves. We need participatory, locally meaningful way to evaluate impact so the community can keep learning, growing, sustaining their own initiative. Thank you.
I think you make several important points here, Amy. I mean, your comment about intergenerational, when we perhaps try to orchestrate it too much, and your call is let the interaction develop organically sometimes. Of course, it's a balance between intention and letting it, so how you achieve that balance. And the second point that you made is being context specific. If for it to be adapted to the local context instead of being blindly applied, sometimes will be a very big contributor to success. And last but not least, very important, the involvement of the community, both in design, implementation, but also for evaluating its implementation. So I think very good points, and I'm sure we'll have questions and discussions. I intend to come back to you. Thank you so much. I'd like to go next, and the last speaker on this round, Riju. As a youth representative, perhaps you can give us a report card as to how you think policymakers, thought leaders, media, and civil society have managed to address the challenges faced by future generations so far, and which are the areas that need improvement, according to you.
Thank you so much, Srinivas. I think in many ways, the future is already here. I mean, in my own family, I see it every day. I have a younger brother navigating school and an uncertain job market. Grandparents are trying to access affordable healthcare, cousins who are thinking of migrating abroad, and of course, peers who feel deeply connected but are also politically unheard. So these aren't isolated experiences, and they reflect a deeper transformation sweeping across the Asian Pacific. And I believe that demographic change is beyond statistics. It is political and it is generational. It shapes who stays, who leaves, who's cared for, and who's left out as well. As examples, we can see that so many civil society movements, youth networks, government institutions have already started addressing these shifts. But too often, our efforts are short-term or in short of sustainability. The long-term vision of how we build resilience across generations is actually built on partnerships across generations, across authorities, across stakeholders, and a shared accountability and meaningful engagement of these stakeholders. That's why the Declaration on Future Generations. I'm sorry, am I audible?
Please go on. No, please go on.
Okay. So that's why the Declaration on Future Generations, which was adopted in 2024 as part of an annex to the Pact for the Future, is very important as well, because it recognizes these demographic trends, and it also emphasizes that these trends must be governed with intergenerational justice at the core. It calls for inclusive, long-term policies for youth participation, for social protection of older persons, and systems that serve not just today, but decades to come, including adolescents and children as well. But demographic shifts don't happen in vacuum. So over 3 decades, we've seen how globalization has connected us more deeply. And these examples are very real, lifting millions from poverty, expanding education, and creating powerful tools of change as well. Yet it has also created new vulnerabilities of economic instability, exclusion, and also weakened democracies. So I remember this particular Haberman's quote where he states that what we live in right now is a post-national constellation where traditional governance struggles to address complex realities, which also includes aging, youth unemployment, and of course, care deficits as well. So the result is a crisis of democratic legitimacy. People often feel unheard and institutions feel very distant to us. And the urgent needs for both young and older generations are sidelined in the course. This is where civil society becomes essential. Across the region, we have seen powerful examples where young people have demanded for climate justice, which is rooted in intergenerational rights. We can see the forthcoming UPAN conference happening as well around adaptation measures. We've also seen women's cooperatives and communities in places like Nepal where they're sustaining domestic and community economies as well. Then there are disability rights activists who are shaping cities, who are shaping programs, or who are shaping plans to become more accessible for all. But how can we do better? I think I will reiterate what I just said in my earlier intervention, which is to invest in care system, which is to ensure reproductive and sexual health care and gender equality, and also expand lifelong learning and digital inclusion. Thank you, Srinivas.
Thank you so much, Riju, because you already answered something that came through on the chat in terms of specifically what do you think would really help young and old to work together on co-developing an inclusive society. Some of these points answer it, but in case you can think of more specifics, I'll come back to you. So thank you very much to all panelists for being so brilliant, succinct, and addressing the questions directly. You provided a lot of food for thought, and we already have a number of questions which have been addressed to the panelists. So all the panelists, please put on your cameras, switch on your cameras, because it's great, because it will appear like a discussion. I have a few questions that are coming up. I mean, the question is addressed to Andrew, but others can volunteer to answer. Andrew, in a number of countries, there are laws which require adult offspring to take care of their older persons, of their older parents. And of course, there have been questions of enforcement as how you do that, but they have been there in a number of countries. Do you see that as an important element of a right-based approach to aging, to population aging? And so just wanted to take you on that. And I'll also ask the second question, which is the remark made about climate change. How does climate change provide the platform for utilizing older persons' ability and experience? And how can young and old work together in addressing climate action? And what would be your suggestions on that, especially at local level? So these are the two questions. Perhaps we'll address the first one. Andrew, will go to you for your response on the first question about the implementation of the law.
I'm probably not the best person to ask, Srinivas. I'm aware my cultural background is not one where the idea of legislative enforcement of that sort of ethical or moral position sits very comfortably with the individualist ethic that I come from. But so I think it'd be interesting to hear from others. But I think it does raise the challenge with human rights when the state should be forcing the family to do things, and when it should be it has a role itself. And my instinctive response will be to ask, what does the older person think about this in terms of, because it's very uncomfortable in so many ways, and if the individual has a right to social security and adequate standard of living, is it appropriate that it come through the force of the law directed against a child? But I think it's probably contested. I feel very uncomfortable with it, but others might see it as a good thing and an excellent tradition, and that's certainly the story we get from proponents of those sorts of laws.
I thank you for your very straight response on that. Yes, there have been some challenges on implementation of that. I think the intentions are very well noted. It's obviously the older parents having the whole thing about maybe it's legislating filial piety to a certain extent. So would any of the other panelists wish to answer this question in particular before we go to the environment one? If you want to, otherwise, please, you can reflect on it. But I'd like to come with the second question about how climate change provides an opportunity. Are there good examples how older persons can address? We see older persons as being impacted, which is correct, that older persons are often adversely impacted more than other sections of the population by climate change. But they also have a lot to offer as resource persons, as people who can contribute to addressing the impact of climate change. So I would like to ask the panel if you have any ideas and how can older and younger people live together, work together. So maybe, Riju, I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you have any thoughts on that coming from Nepal? And maybe if there'll be Emmy, would you like to also answer it? I'll come back to you. Riju, for you first, and then I'll move to Emmy.
Yeah, I think for us as well, climate crisis plays a very significant role, seeing how we have been facing the monsoon season this year as well, and how things have changed over the past few decades as well. But having said that, there are new mitigation and adaptation measures that we young people propose and we bring into tables. But having also realizing the rich tradition that we come from, there's a lot of indigenous knowledge and practices around climate specific measures that could be enhanced and could be institutionalized in a country like Nepal, which largely depends on traditional family structures, traditional structures of economy, and all these kind of things. So I really believe that positioning young people as partners in policy making around climate mitigation, financing climate mitigation and adaptation measures, especially in Global South, and also by promoting the indigenous practices of climate solutions could be a helpful solution.
Thank you very much. I think you've given us the first thoughts on this. Maybe I'll move to Emmy, and Lisa, if you have any thoughts on that, I'll come to you too.
Okay.
Emmy?
Yes, I will just share my own experience. When I was working on Community Hub, that actually the first one was done in post-disaster time in Japan when we had a tsunami. So what we've learned was that older people are treated vulnerable populations. Yet when you really listen to what they were able to do, they had this indigenous sort of ideas and knowledge, just like they knew where to escape and which part to go. When all this system, like electricity is down, water system is down, all this technology is down, that's when older person's knowledge really shine because their knowledge is not depending on the electricity and water system. So basically, I think we really have to think about it when we talk about the resilient system, the kind of system, the knowledge that older people can provide is a very strong part of creating resiliency because their knowledge, at the time of the disaster, they can actually provide the knowledge. And also one of the things that I've learned is that when older people are the system is not there to support older people, that is terrible for their family members because younger people won't leave their parents or grandparents at home. So we really have to think about, just life course approach of mitigation for the disaster.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Emmy. Ms. Basales, any comments from you very briefly from Philippines perspective?
Thank you very much, Mr. Tata. Philippines is disaster prone. And so how are data used to help older persons and different generations? The government actually gets information on the population distribution per area, so they know what percentage are older persons, what percentage are women, and so that when a disaster occurs, appropriate evacuation procedures are done. But I would like to share that in the Philippines, when evacuation is done, older persons who are able actually help with caregiving for the younger children.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So So yeah, again, you focused on what could be the contributions, apart from, of course, providing the knowledge and ideas based on their experience previously. Thank you very much. And we have actually, I thought Kajian from OHCHR, from the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights, who had his hand up. Did you want to respond to a specific point, Kajian? In that case, especially on the question raised on the feasibility of legislating, filial piety. So and maybe on the regional, on the global instrument. Can Kajian be given the floor, please? Just for a very brief response from his side. While that's being done, I have one more comment. When it's ready, please let us know. Okay, so he's put his hand down. So maybe I have a question about a remark that's come from one of our participants, and he's Prakash from Gravis, who's really doing a lot of work on the ground. And Emmy, he comes back to the point that you make about the fact that we often focus too much on the infrastructural, and we are not focusing so much on the social and the emotional elements of creating an enabling environment. And he feels that these need to be expanded. So do you have any reaction to that? How are there any ways that people can learn? I mean, what are the elements that are critical for that? Because this is often what is called software. I mean, the infrastructure, the ramps, the physical infrastructure is often called the hardware. But again, the understanding of the social and emotional dimension maybe is varied depending on where you're working. So any ideas what needs to be in place for that to happen? Just a very brief response from you.
Okay. So yeah, I think those normally that integrating soft parts, software part lies in the process of design. So I think rather than focusing on the outcome, how can we include people's voice in the process of infrastructure process is very, very important. And also that we have a tendency to see built environment as a static. Once it's designed, it's done. But we should be able to really think about how the space can be dynamically involved when the people's needs change. That really, again, going back to the integrating of the voice of needs of the person in the process of the design.
Thank you very much, Emmy. And I think, Kajian, did you want to react to something that was said? I mean, one of the questions, very briefly, and then I'll be also asking on our colleague from UN Women if she can intervene briefly. She's been a champion on older women. So I will ask Kajian first from OHCHR for your input, please.
Thank you, Mr. Tata, and thank you all panelists. It's been a very interesting panel, and I've learned a lot. Just to reflect a little bit on the instruments thing regarding the legal protection for the rights of older persons. I fully agree with what Andrew has said. It's very important that we need to, at the same time, implement what is already there, and also we need to look at to draft a new comprehensive legally binding instrument to ensure a set of standard for the protection of the rights of older persons. I know that many countries in the world already have some kind of more or less legal protection, but at the moment, I think it's not enough, and there's no global standard for this. So I think as someone from the Asia Pacific myself, I see that each country in the region faces unique challenges when it comes to these legal protections. But at the same time, as a bloc, we have some problems in common. So it's very important in the process of drafting this legally binding instrument, the Asia Pacific as a group will advocate for what is important for this region to make sure the challenges that we face are reflected in this document. So I think that is something as the advocacy work we need to focus on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kajin. And in fact, your response really, the question was very interesting. Our ex-director, Ms. Thelma K., I see her remark on the chat that on the whole legislation of parental support in Singapore, it's more used as a platform for mediation and intervention rather than for legal prosecution. And she feels that it enables sibling equity and also mediation. So that's an experience that is coming from Singapore, an interesting aspect. And now I think I would like to ask Aparna Mehrotra from UN Women Headquarters. Thank you for joining us. I know it's pretty late in New York, and and it's great to have a champion. And Aparna, thank you so much for really mainstreaming the issue of older women in the women's agenda. And I think this is very critical. So over to you for your reflections and where you think that we should be working more. It's not working, Aparna. We'll come back. Try to fix what you have, and maybe I'll come back to you later. It's important to hear from you. Andrew, you had some inputs about the whole issue of how in Australia you're looking at the knowledge of older persons for tackling the climate change impacts. So, Andrew, maybe a reflection from you.
Yeah, look, it was just one example. As you know, Australia has a lot of major bushfires as well as floods and other things. And one knowledge that has increasingly been recovered by the broader non-Indigenous community is the traditional practices of burning country in order to keep the burnable combustible material down, and thereby avoid the large-scale, very destructive bushfires that after colonisation we've seen more of. So it's been bringing that traditional Indigenous elder knowledge back into managing the land and preserving it. That's just one of many examples of Indigenous knowledge about how to care for the land in a environmentally sustainable way.
Thank you. I have a question that's actually all addressed to all the panelists, I think. What do you think will be the impact of, we are increasingly seeing the changing living arrangements and the trend towards single-person households in Asia Pacific, where in our region, in many countries, especially the countries which are moving aged and super-aged, 30 to 35% of the households are single-person households, often of older persons, and often it's older women. So what impact will that have in terms of the way we organize care? What do we need to take into account? Because the whole logic that is often put forward is the family is the cornerstone. But where the family itself is not there, I mean, how do we deal with such situations? What will be the role of the community and what will be the role of the state? Can I ask some of the panelists to perhaps respond on this? Can I come back? Emmy, can I start with you on this?
I was hoping I wasn't going to be picked. But,
okay.
No, that's fine. I think it is the research initiative we are actually working on currently as a critical trend. So basically, there are two issues. It's a housing policies issues and also care issues. Those are two separate yet connected. And it has also have impact on like even climate change, because older people who are lower income don't even turn air conditioning on. So that's going to be a problem. So it has economic and housing issues involved. And I think it has a care issues. And also in terms of care, again, older person who are women, quite vulnerable, but their daughters, when it comes to care, if the system is not set there, people will have to, the young women also have impact of being a caregiver. So it is, it's issues that needs to be addressed, but I just don't have holistic sort of understanding still yet. I hope that answered your question okay.
Yes, you highlighted both issues, the care aspect and the housing, the fact that we can perhaps design housing in a way that perhaps the community can really support them, they can be, and also others. So can I request people who are putting up the hand in the audience, if you can put your questions in the chat, please, because there is a slightly difficult process in really reaching out. And so it would be great if you can put the questions in the chat. I'd like to ask Aparna if you can intervene at this stage.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm sorry I joined late, but I've listened for the last hour and it's really enlightening. And I want to congratulate all the panelists and the organizers. In addition to this short intervention, the opportunity for the intervention. I just wanted to stress that, when you look at the population of older women, you realize that in a few years, it's going to be the older people will be about 2.1 billion, and a majority of that will be older women. So what we find sometimes is that the lens through which we have to look at this, whether you're in a youth bulge today or will be in a aging bulge, or are already in an aging bulge, I think this lens has to be used. And several people have alluded to it. And the last speaker has raised a very important point, which is the issue of, who provides the care. So I just want to reiterate 2 points. One is that the inequalities of women accumulate over their lifetime, and so by the time they're older, they are actually cumulatively more disadvantaged. They have lower pensions, they have worse health outcomes, etc. And the numbers of how early they go into poverty before the end of their life is staggering. And the difference with men is also staggering. In some countries, it's women on average will go 19 years into poverty before the end of their life, and for men it's 11 or 12 years. So the differential increases as you get older. And I just think that that is a lens that isn't used enough. We've done a lot of work, but you see entire reports which don't look at this aspect. And I also want to say that trampolining off of what the last speaker said, women have provided contributions all their lives. And yet, even in their older years, because of the stereotypes, all the burden disproportionately falls on women. And ironically, because they live longer, then there's few left to care for them. So this idea of just focusing on older women has also to include the aspect of boys. And that's where the intergenerational dialogue and solidarity and enhancement of understanding we have to find ways to do that, because many societies, well, India is one, which is the largest population in the world right now, I believe. The patriarchal stereotype is very, very prevalent. Even if you talk to the 27-year-old people, or 25-year-old people. So I think this is an aspect which I just want to stress and say that the intergenerational dialogue and the independent lens through which we have to look at the issue of aging, because of its moral aspects, because it's a moral imperative, because it's an economic imperative, and every other type of imperative, is really important. Thank you for giving me the floor.
Not at all.
Really
Not at all.
appreciate.
Great that you stayed up so late. I know you're intervening from New York, so thank you so much for being part of our debate. This is very much central. Aparna, I can tell you that the the gender dimension of aging is very much in the forefront of the discourse here. I can assure you member states are aware, and we're working on that. And we are also very aware that the areas in which women are particularly disadvantaged, the fact that they often are not part of the labor force, they often do not have access to a pension, and they often provide care to the spouse when he's alive, and when the spouse passes away and they are older, there's often no one to look after them. So all those points are very important, and your intervention was, thank you so much for reminding us, but I can assure you that it is very central part of the discourse here. We have just a couple more questions in terms of one question which is addressed to all panelists. And the question is, what is one transformative action that governments, communities, or CSOs can take to strengthen intergenerational solidarity and to ensure that both young and older persons are seen as active contributors to society? And there is another question which also both all panelists can look at answering. Of course, care has the component where you have, of course, the role of the family, the role of the state, and on the role of the caregivers and also the role of the older person himself or herself. So here the question is about the role of the older person, herself or himself, in promoting self-care in countries. How can older persons be trained to provide care for themselves better and to reduce dependency, especially, I think, given the trend towards single-person households and a number of them tending to live alone. So both these questions to all panelists, please put your hands up. Who would like to go first on this without putting people on the spot? Any volunteers, please? Otherwise, yes, Andrew, we'll start with you, please.
I think one transformative or potentially transformative action would be for a government to adopt a national plan on the elimination of ageism with all its various diverse elements, including the gender dimension that is so important and has been stressed. And secondly, I guess, in relation to caregiving, that whole area, I think once again, we need to go back to language, and the language that is often preferred by human rights advocates in the older persons field is care and support. The idea that it's not care in a very passive way, but supporting someone to make active decisions. And I think that partially responds to the people looking after themselves. So it's supporting independence, as we would do with others. And the rights of caregivers, of course, is another emerging area that the Human Rights Council is looking at. And it's very important too, and shouldn't just be neglected because it's unremunerated, invisible work largely performed by women, as has been said by Aparna. Thanks.
Riju, you next to answer perhaps the question on the one transformative action that can be taken.
I think I will bring in the call from all young people here, where I will re-emphasize that it's essential that we bring people from different generations and across different races and without any discrimination into the table of decision making, and really not enforce laws and prosecutions against their lived realities. We will need to respect their voices, their perspectives into bringing solutions that they can work together with. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Ms. Basales.
Thank you, Mr. Tata. I would like to give my answer from my experience in government. Transformative action, something which will give push, in my opinion, should be started by a government agency. In the Philippines, we have our Department of Economy, Planning, and Development. This is because government has more reach and it has the resources to start it. And so usually, government commits to the SDGs, commits to MIPAA, commits to ICPD 30. And so this should be started by government, but with push from civil society organizations and participation of private sector, academe, and various sectors. In the Philippines, this usually is done when we are preparing for the new president to come in. But in the Philippines, we have the voluntary national review for the SDGs. So this is a forum for civil society, say, to push for discussing what else can be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I think you highlighted the role of VNRs and maybe also the UPRs, which as an opportunity. So thank you very much. So last but not least, let me go to Emmy. Emmy, maybe you are best placed to answer the question on self-care, if you'd like to. Of course, we have responses, but what do you think, what can be done to empower older persons to look after themselves better, to train them better, before you arrive at your one transformative action? So I have two questions to that, two tasks for you then.
So what I have learned is that, because the aging society we've never experienced in the past, and we have so many more older persons in the world, especially when I go back to Japan. So one very fundamental question I don't know how to answer that needs a discussion is, I don't know what older people want and need at this right moment, at this new reality. I don't think we have honest enough discussion about this around like what older people want and what older people needs, so as what younger people wants and needs, and what will be a possible solution together. To me, that will be very helpful because we have a tendency to decide what's good for them, what's good for the older person or younger people, but that seems to have a gap. So that's part of discussion that can, I think, government agencies or the international agency like United Nations can actually have initiation for that kind of discussion. So one transformative actions. I think we all have to change our mindset, including older people themselves. I think again we need an honest discussion about to what extent that neighbor can help, to from what extent we need a professional care in the community, so that we will have a clearer understanding about how we can communicate. I mean, how can we move forward supporting within the community setting, being older, just age, without worried about being a burden or without worried about not enough care.
Thank you very much. I think we have now come to the end of the time for this panel discussion. Esteemed panelists, dear colleagues, I hope you'll all agree that this has been a very lively and engaging discussion on a critical regional global megatrend which is affecting and will affect all aspects of society. Demographic change is here, it's upon us. Living longer and often healthier lives is a positive development outcome which should give us much reason to celebrate. Yet, we need to remind ourselves that we should strengthen intergenerational relations and solidarity. We must build understanding and trust through stable, rights-based, forward-looking, and inclusive policies and programs. Our goal should be to build a society for all ages. And for older persons, I think I'm going to quote some very wise person that I heard who said it is about not adding years to life, but equally important to add life to the years. So that's very, very important to have a productive, healthy aging. And so I hope that today's event has contributed to a better understanding on how we can achieve this, focusing on the economic, social, and environmental aspects. I can promise on behalf of ESCAP and my partners, and even perhaps on behalf of the entire UN system, to continue working on this discussion as we prepare for the fifth review and appraisal of the Madrid International Plan of Action in Asia Pacific. I thank you all for your patience. 100 participants have remained till the end. So panelists, it is a tribute to the quality of your interventions. Thank you very much for joining us and enriching it. And thank you also for the previous speakers. And I thank my team for really planning this so well and focusing this discussion. So thank you very much and have a nice weekend looking ahead.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.